The radical progeny of the ecumenists had less incentive to return to their party. So much Protestantism fell increasingly into the hands of the other party. That mattered only if one continued to believe that the Christian religion was ultimately the most viable foundation for the kind of society that ecumenical Protestant leaders had come by the 1960s to advocate. The belief in indispensability of Christianity, while regarded as a conceit by secular thinkers and adherents of other religions, had long sustained even the most liberal of the ecumenical Protestants in their worldly activities and helps to explain their complacency. But this belief in the unique contribution to Christianity to the world lost its hold on many followers of Niebuhr, Smith, and Cox, all of whom had still believed in it. Christianity became only one of a number of valuable vehicles for values that transcended the ancestral faith. Children of the old Protestant establishment found that Christianity was not so indispensable to the advancement of the values most energetically taught to them by their Methodist and Congregationalist tutors. But secular alliances were not new for ecumenical Protestants, and the past had not been so dangerous for them. Why was it different this time? The drift of post-Protestantism was more pronounced in the 1960s and after because of the novel ethno-religious demography of that era. Jews were much more prominent in American civil life in the 1960s and after than they had been in the progressive era or in the 1930s. The leading secular intellectuals of the 1960s were much less grounded in a Christian past than their predecessors had been. The greatest secular philosopher of the first half of the 20th century, John Dewey, after all, was a lapsed Congregationalist and had actually engaged religious issues rather than ignored them as irrelevant to serious intellectual inquiry. And in the world beyond the North Atlantic West that the ecumenists engaged, non-Christians were much more empowered in the 1960s and were in charge of many enterprises in Africa and Asia. In this setting, countless individuals who inherited the traditions of ecumenical Protestantism put their energies into an inclusive collection of secular agencies, including the human rights organizations that flourished in the 1970s and after. These post-Protestant endeavors are a major feature of modern American life, yet our recognition of them has been obscured by a survivalist bias, by which I mean a preference for, if not a commitment to, the survival of Christianity. From a Christian survivalist point of view, the key questions about ecumenical Protestantism are first, whether it has been able to perpetuate itself on its own terms, and second, whether it has advanced the Christian project effectively or contributed to the actual weakening of that project. These questions dominate the existing scholarly and popular literature, and they reflect the religion-protecting outlook of the Living Foundation, which has funded most of the scholarship on the destiny of ecumenical Protestantism. The ecumenical leadership's tolerance of diversity and openness, like Wade Clark Brooke and William McKinney, tended to erode loyalty to the inherent religious order and ultimately spawned many secularists among its own progeny. Mainline Protestantism's emphasis on inclusiveness and diversity made it function rather like a sieve, as Brooke and another of his Lilly supporter collaborators put it. This figure of speech is typical of commentators who suggest that if only the ecumenists had worked vigorously to acculturate their youth and maintain tighter organizational discipline, things might have turned out more favorably for the churches. This survivalist perspective misses a reality to which this address has drawn attention. The historic function of self-interrogating ecumenical Protestantism as an environment in which many Americans found themselves able to sympathetically engage a panorama of ethno-racial, sexual, religious, and cultural varieties in human kind. The ecumenical leadership, as it engaged the diversity of the modern world, enabled their community of faith to serve among its other roles as a commodious halfway house to what, for lack of a better term, we can call post-Protestant secularism. To recognize this is in no way invidious, unless one approaches history as a Christian survivalist. Religious affiliations, like other solidarities, are, after all, contingent entities generated, sustained, transformed, diminished, and destroyed by the changing circumstances of history. Those circumstances still render ecumenical Protestantism a vibrant and vital home for many persons. A genuinely historicist approach to history will not teleologically predict the future of any community of faith. Once this historic function of ecumenical Protestantism is recognized, however, it becomes possible to see that ecumenical Protestantism actually advanced some of its central goals, even while its organizational jumping disappeared. The diversity preoccupied aspects of American life today look much more like what the editors of the Christian Century in 1960 hoped it would look like than what the editors of Christianity today were then projecting as an ideal future. Ecumenical leaders may have lost American Protestantism, argues M.J. Demarest III, but they won the United States. The Ecumenic's campaign for individualism, freedom, pluralism, tolerance, democracy, and intellectual inquiry, observed Demarest, exactly the liberal values that gained ground and lost ground in the public culture of the United States in the second half of the 20th century. These values were not peculiar to ecumenical Protestants, but the latter's emphatic advocacy of these values enacted ecumenical Protestantism's historic accommodation with secular liberalism. These values serve as key justifications for many of the transformations of the 1960s and have been invoked since that time in countless specific contexts as the United States has confronted massive immigration from non-European lands and has sought to find ways to do justice to the descendants of its enslaved and conquered peoples. What Demarest calls the cultural victory of ecumenical Protestantism is easily exaggerated, but so too is the political victory the Democrats achieved by abandoning the South. American politics as a whole are massively influenced even today by the conservative Republicans of the states of the old Confederacy. And the great authority exercised today by politically conservative evangelical Protestants in the U.S. Senate and Congress bespeaks no victory for Randall D. Moore and G. Bromley Austin. Yet one domain in which Demarest's hyperbole has impressive credibility is religion itself. Two leading sociologists report that young adults of virtually all varieties of faith now talk like liberal Protestants. Included in this company insist Christian Smith and Patricia Snell are white evangelicals. Smith and Snell declare that Harry Emerson Fosdick would be proud to hear today's religious banter because even the white evangelicals, grandchildren of the people who so resented Fosdick's dominance on the airwaves of the 1930s, were now paraphrasing passages from the classic liberal Protestants like Fosdick. The liberal ideas developed at Andover Union and Harvard have trickled down at fast. But not all of them. The commitment to diminish inequality that mattered so much to Luther Cantwell Smith and so many other ecumenists of the world is not so abundant in the cheerful tolerance and diversity talk discovered almost everywhere by today's sociologists. If younger rank and file evangelicals have adopted many of the ecumenists' perspectives on religion as such, why are liberal political opinions still so decidedly in the minority in evangelical circles? Our era's most distinguished political sociologist, Robert Putnam, and his collaborator, David Campbell, believe they have the answer to this question. The popular association of religion with right-wing politics has consolidated during the Reagan era by evangelical entrepreneurs, was highly successful, but appears to have diminished the appeal of religion for anyone who is not comfortable with such a politics. There are fewer and fewer political liberals in any church, and fewer political conservatives outside the churches. Religion has always had a political matrix, but in the United States of the 21st century, religion may be in the process of becoming more epiphenomenal. Putnam and Campbell argue that political opinions are exercising more and more control over decisions about religious affiliation. As religious pluralism reigns and doctrinally based distinctions between persuasions diminish, political distinctions become more powerful determinants of religious affiliation rather than demonstrable results of such affiliations. Secularization by itself. But however we assess the contemporary scene, and however we may speculate about the future, certain historical realities ought to be clear. The evangelicals gained the upper hand in the struggle for control of Protestantism, just as the Republicans gained the upper hand in the struggle for political control of the South. In both cases, the triumph was facilitated by the decisions and actions of the rival party. This analogy, like can be carried too far, but just as